so let me just ask you two questions. Do you
Mhm.
think humans evolved from a common ancestor? That's the first question. And second question is, do you think our thoughts are just chemical events in our brains?
Well, so to answer the first question, yes, we definitely evolved. That is, I think that's mostly indisputable.
From a
For the second
common
question,
ancestor, right?
yeah. So like,
But
yeah.
is
So
that
we
an objective
evolved from.
claim?
What do you mean by an objective claim there? Because
Because you
like I
said
said, my language around objectivity and subjectivity is a little divorced from what you might be accustomed to.
right, so you must define objectivity some other way. Because I define objective just to be like mind independent. Like it doesn't matter what we believe. The facts would still obtain the same facts. So when you say like you define objectivity in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
you define like, okay, let's just talk about mind independence. So do you think if humans, let's say humans all of a sudden just became like all like non-conscious, do you think it'd still be true that humans evolved from apes?
Well, so yes, it would still be true. It's not like it disappears with our minds, so to speak. Instead, it's what's called stance independence. So objectivity is a stance independence position. So what that means is like independent of where you stand, the evidence points in the same direction. And it's not going to be dependent on like for instance, the truth maker for a subjective proposition is going to be an agent, right? That's the agent is participating in the truth making, and that's what makes something subjective versus objective, which is when something is not having an agent being the participant in making the truth. So
Well,
it's not about.
if you just define subjectivity and objectivity that way, then I have no issues with that, because I concede that agents can discover objective truth,
Well,
but
yeah.
that's not where the disagreement lies, right?
Hmm.
The disagreement lies in the fact that you seem to say that mind independent reality is just it's meaningless to even talk about it. So then how is it meaningful to say that humans evolved from apes, in the sense that it's a mind independent reality,
Well,
right?
there's a strangeness to the question, right? So you're presuming like some sort of linguistic thing, which I think is going to be something about us talking to each other, and then you're asking how can you say this is true? And it's like, well, both of those
No,
things.
meaningful, not true, meaningful.
Well, meaningful is going to involve like intentions, right? So like for something to have like a meaning, is there's going to be a relationship between the language that I'm using and what I'm intending to point to, and so that's still going to be an agential like exercise, right? I don't think that whenever we talk about the world independent of minds, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I think I understand what someone is attempting to point to and what they're attempting to say. I just don't find it sensible to talk about it in that way, because when we start talking about things like this, we fundamentally bring it into a conceptual realm, and that's my analysis on the topic. So I think that
Okay.
when I'm talking
So,
about
so you
like.
just don't find it meaningful to talk about evolution as being mind independent?
Well, when I talk about it being a stance independent, so evolution is going to be there. There might be something that we're pointing to in reality that's independent of us, but I don't know how we would even talk about that thing, right? In the same
Okay,
way
so
that
it's meaningless to talk about, right? You
so
just believe
instead,
that.
now this doesn't reduce to subjectivity in the conventional sense. So like the subjectivity of the conventional sense is going to be something about us and our agency is making something true, right? And that's not what I think either. So, because I don't think that we are participating in the truth making. What's happening is we're studying our phenomenal experience of things. We're taking the time to say, okay, well, we experience this world and the mode in which we experience it. And based on this, if we were there, this is the way things would have played out, right? And so, like, when we're digging up dinosaurs and we're going back farther into the geological record, we're finding more and more different things, but all those things are going to be reducible to like our experiences and some.
Okay. So let me give you a quick quick argument.
Mhm.
Premise one is it's meaningless to talk about mind independent reality, right? Is that something you consented to 10 minutes ago?
I don't find it like something that we can do, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I guess that premise sounds about right.
Yeah, great, because we have a recording, so it's not like So somebody can like just go back and listen to what was said. Okay,
Mhm.
so premise one is that it's meaningless to talk about mind independent reality. Premise two would be evolution would be a subset of would be a theory which is a subset of theories which are considered to be mind independent.
That's not true. So
Okay, so
usually
evolution is
you
not as
you
then.
have to be careful to dissect methodological naturalism, which is an epistemic field, right, from metaphysical naturalism, which is a metaphysic, right? So these are two different
Right,
things.
but you don't have a view on metaphysics, so that's why I'm talking about methodology. Well, actually, you do have a view on metaphysics. You said it's meaningless to talk about mind independent reality.
In the
I'm not.
classical sense.
I'm not sure if that's even a methodology. If it's a metaphysical or an epistemic. It's an ontological or epistemic view.
Well,
I
so,
think it'd be a denial of the idea that there's such a thing as mind independent.
well, it's not. It's not that there isn't a thing that is mind independent. It's that we can't meaningfully talk about it without making it mind, without bringing it into the phenomenal realm. So, like,
Oh, okay,
if
okay.
if you and I, there might be this thing out there, right, that I can't really conceptualize in any meaningful sense without conceptualizing it, right? The request is itself contradictory. You're asking me to conceptualize something without conceptualizing it, and that's why we can't do it.
Okay,
But
okay. So then premise two would be scientific theories are it's meaningless to talk about scientific theories as if they're mind independent.
yeah, I think that we're just wrong about the assumptions when it comes to like thinking about scientific theories as being mind independent in the strong sense.
Okay.
Like when
Okay.
we talk
So
about
then
stance independence, yeah, they are stance independent. Like it doesn't really matter what you believe or what you think on the topic. They accurately represent the data and the evidence, right?
okay, okay. So they're stance independent in the sense that they're picking out some feature which would be invariant even if minds never existed, right?
Well, I don't know about whether or not minds ever existed. I don't really know how I would answer that. Like I said, once we start talking about something phenomenal, like for me anyway, once we start talking about it, it's phenomenal. We can't. It's, once we make that leap, you're asking for a contradiction. I can't deliver.
Okay, so does stance independence pick out any essential features? Does it pick out any features at all of mind independent universe of
I
like
don't even
let's
know how
suppose
to answer.
let me rephrase the question. Does does a stance independent view pick out any features of the world which would still exist if minds never existed?
I don't know. I don't really know. If I have a view on that, to be honest.
Okay, so you don't have a view on that. So then that seems to me like rejection of the idea that stance independence. Um, yeah. So basically, your stance in independence seems to be equivalent to mind dependence.
Not really. No. So like, so for instance, I can be agnostic on a topic without making a commitment that it's just that thing, right? So like, for instance, if I say I don't know whether or not you're holding an apple behind your back, doesn't mean that I'm committed to that you're not having holding an apple behind your back. And this is what I call this. It's called the step too far. It's the same mistake that Berkeley ended up making with his master argument. So Berkeley said something along the lines of the tree argument I was giving you earlier. So whenever we go to say something about that tree, it immediately becomes phenomenal. But the step too far is to say, well, there's nothing independent about that tree that's independent of our minds. Well, we don't really know that necessarily. What we do know is that the things that we talk about are going to be something about our experience, and whether or not those experiences correspond to some state of affairs in reality is a little bit more up in the air than like a hard set. It's one direction or the other. Like that's just not true. So there's going to be there might be features of our experience that point to something in reality, and I don't really have a way of quantifying that. Right. Like the thing is that once I start talking about the thing, I've immediately brought it into the phenomenal realm from my view. The moment I start talking about a door, I'm talking about some sort of a concept that's going to be laden with everything from my historical context around what a door is to like my conception of a door to some sort of spatial temporal thing, right? Space and time are gonna augment that. The colors are gonna augment that. So there's all these filters that my world is going to be going through in my experience. Now that doesn't come to the conclusion that the door doesn't exist independent of my mind. It's just that I don't have a way of talking about it that way.
Okay. So then the second premise would be that stance-independent theories pick out, or stance-independent investigations or theories don't pick out. There's no reason to suppose that stance-independent theories or investigations pick out any sort of a property which would exist if minds never existed.
Can you say the whole thing again? Because that was like it seems long-winded.
There's no reason to suppose that stance-independent investigations or stance-independent theories pick out any properties which would exist if minds never existed.
I mean, I'd be kind of non-committal, like I said, on that one. I don't know how I would answer it.
Yeah. If you're non-committal on the view, that just means you don't have any good reasons to suppose for or against. Meaning that you don't have any good reasons to suppose that stance-independent investigations pick out any properties, right? Any mind invariant properties or mind-independent properties.
Maybe we should talk about what you mean when you say like mind independent. Can you give me like an idea?
No. Sorry. Like by mind independent, I just mean properties which would exist if minds never existed. So I'm just going to define mind independent as that from now on. Properties which would exist.
What would those properties look like? Like what would they be?
Well, that's a separate question. But I'm just trying to give an argument, like a quick argument.
Okay. I mean, just lay out the argument.
And you agree with premise. You seem to agree with premise too, which is that there's no good reason to suppose that stance-independent investigations or theories pick out any features of the world which would still exist if minds never existed.
More specifically, just that I don't have a way of talking about it in that way. Like, I just don't think that there is a way for you to talk about it that way.
No, it's not meaningful.
That doesn't mean that it doesn't. That doesn't mean that it doesn't pick out features, right? That's the
no. But I never said it doesn't pick out features. I said there's no good reason to suppose it picks out features, right? And you agree with that?
Well, just like I said, just that I can't talk about it that way without bringing it into a mind.
But if you can't talk about it, then you have no good reasons to suppose that it does. Right?
I don't think that follows. Can you give me an argument for that? Because I don't think that follows.
Well, because if I can't talk about X, then how can I even make assumptions about X which are justified, right? In order to be justified, I have to either use an inference. But if I can't talk about X, I can't use an inference. Or like I have to have like some type of other like non-inferential justification. But like what type of non-inferential justification can you have for the idea that
I think there are non-inferential justifications for things, right? Like,
okay.
Intuitions are going to be justified, for instance. And I don't think those are necessarily like inferential of any kind.
Okay, now, so you think when we're talking about inferential justification for the idea that stands independent?
Could you maybe practice like whenever I'm speaking, try not to, and then whenever you're speaking, I'll try to do the same.
Yeah, of course.
It's really distracting for my thought process whenever somebody like over talks. I tend to stop talking when someone else starts talking, but at the same time, it's very distracting. So, like I was saying, like I think you're making the same mistake that Berkeley did. What you're doing is called the step too far. So you're looking for to say, okay, well, there's no reason to think this, and it's like, well, there might be reasons to think that. I just don't have a way to talk about it, right? So, like some sort of an intuition towards the topic might be like, okay, I have this intuition that whenever I'm referring to space and time, even though it's not identical to my conception of it, I'm probably looking at something and thinking of something that is out there that is independent of me. I just don't have a way of talking about it without making it dependent on my existence, right?
And, so, like, what if I gave you like a rebuttal of that intuition? Then would you think that would be like force? Let's say I give you a forceful rebuttal. Like obviously that would be like an undercutting, maybe not an undercutting, but like that would be a defeater for your view, right?
Yeah, if you have a defeater for that position, sure, go ahead.
Well, okay. So what about current scientific models which suggest that when you unify quantum theory with general relativity, space and time disappear, and therefore you can't trust your basic intuitions regarding the existence of like physical stuff?
I don't think that's an accurate representation. They don't say space and time disappear. It's like, so for instance, it becomes superpositioned, but that doesn't mean it disappears. That's just false. It doesn't
Well,
disappear. Can you give me a paper or
it
something
does.
where
It does because, like, the current theory suggests that when you combine the two theories, you're left with quantum field theory. And in quantum field theory, there's no physical properties, like, for instance, there's no mass, there's no charge, there's no space. What exists
that's
is
just that's just false. So the
space is
everything
supposed to
goes
be.
into a superposition. That doesn't mean that space and everything disappears. That's not.
I, I didn't
That's kind
say
of
I didn't
I
say
call
because
it
it goes into superposition.
quantum. It's like quantum mysticism. Like this. It's kind of a new age sort of thing where people will they'll say something like, "Oh, well, quantum physics, tells us this," and so, well, no. So one, there's different theories on it, and some of them reconcile this in different ways. The counterintuitiveness of it doesn't mean that space and time disappear. That's just not true. That's an over exaggeration of the data. So it's either the case that there's going to be like multiple universes, for instance, as one example for the reconciliation of it, or things are just in this sort of superposition, which is to say that there's not like this one singular determined position for everything until there's an observer. Now, an observer is not mind dependence. This is where also the faulty part of the conversation comes in. What they don't mean is that you or me or Marco or people or even animals have to be involved. It has to be some kind of a measurement. So observers can be non-mental things, and that's the
So
interesting
I'm
part
not
about
I'm
it.
not actually talking about the consciousness causes collapse interpretation. What I'm talking about is quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is a unification of general relativity with quantum mechanics, and basically, under the theory, which is, by the way, it's like the most accepted model in like physics right now. Under the theory, what exists are quantum fields. Quantum fields then are supposed to give rise to space time. Um, but what fundamentally exists is just like space is not fundamental. What actually exists are just like these fields. And these fields have a completely mathematical description. There's no charge. There's no space. They don't have like mass, whatever. Like all the physical. Take out all the physical properties. So then, your intuition that space is like somehow out there doesn't seem to be justified, given like the novel findings in physics.
One, I don't think that we have those sorts of findings. First off, I think that's just a misrepresentation of the data. I'm just going to be blunt about that. I don't think you're accurately representing the data there. So second off, even if,
Well,
like, say, for
what
instance,
about like showing error?
even if I say I granted, for instance, that maybe you're somewhere in the realm of what they're saying. Now, the issue is that, one, I don't think we have a theory of everything. I don't think that there's any theory that successfully does what you're claiming that it does, and I don't think that there's also like a theory that is going to make space and time and everything completely disappear. Even if all of material things were to be like superpositioned, I don't think that it follows from that space and time don't exist. That's just not an entailment of that. But more to the point, I don't know what the topic of the conversation was supposed to be, but I thought it was over theism. Um, and I don't think we've talked about anything to do with God so far.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about theism. I wanted to get your views on certain things first, because I find that a lot of atheists what I talk to often adopt what I consider nonsensical positions, or like highly implausible positions, in order to salvage their views.
I mean,
And
even if
case
that's
in
like the
point,
case, like it doesn't follow that, even if my view somehow adopts some issues, it wouldn't prove theism, right? So I don't know what.
I mean,
was
one of
going.
the theoretical costs of your view is that you reject scientific realism, which I think is a huge theoretical cost.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
No, absolutely.
so this is how that raises the probability of theism, because like when I compare different models, one model doesn't have that cost. Your model does have that cost. That would
I think
lead
that
me to
any model that affirms scientific realism is probably just wrong. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with a number of the issues for scientific realism. Some of the issues are going to be like, even if I grant, say, for instance, that there is this predictive capacity for scientific discoveries. It doesn't follow that scientific discovery is like real in some sort of like stance independent way.
I definitely disagree with that. I mean, I don't think
Well,
theism
let me give
is.
you an example. Let me give you an example then, where because if so, you are committed that so for instance that if something has predictive power, then it's going to be real in a scientific realist sense, right? That's
No,
a
no,
commitment.
I'm not committed to that view. I just
Okay,
think a
well then,
combination of theism plus, um,
but why did
yeah.
you object?
I'm sorry.
Why did you just object then?
Well, because I think it's only a problem if you take a material like a naturalist stance, like if you assume that God doesn't exist. If you don't make that assumption, I don't think you run into the same problem.
What would God have to do with whether or not like predictive capacity leads to truth?
Well, for instance, it could be the case that God could have designed the laws of the universe in such a way that that predictive success does lead to truth.
Well, that's just false, though, right? Like I can demonstrate that that's false. Like
Why?
I can provide examples of things that
Oh,
have predictive capability that are not true.
okay, but then I could just posit that God designed the universe in such a way that yeah, well, sure, you can posit like exceptions to the rule that certain like predictive theories don't have any, or certain predictions don't lead to truth. But that doesn't invalidate the general case that if God designed the laws of the universe in such a way that generally predictive success is correlated to truth, then yeah, then predictive then like that wouldn't be an issue, right?
See, this
Under
this reminds
good.
me of the argument that like God is like the some reason to believe in like the uniformity of nature, and I have a specific objection to this. So, like, I actually think that the uniformity of nature, God stands it to in closer relationship to an objection to the uniformity of nature than he does to a reason to believe in it. So, if you imagine like a culture that's never encountered the Christian God, and
Mhm.
you say, and let's say this culture hypothetically lives right next to the Red Sea, and you ask this culture, well, how do you know that the Red Sea will continue to not be parted? It seems strange that they might answer. They're like, well, because it's we've never seen it be parted. It's there's not really a reason that I would think that it would be parted. You're going to require massive amounts of energy. And you go, okay, well, hypothetically, there's this all powerful deity, and this deity has the power to split the Red Sea.
Mhm.
Right. So do you know that the Red Sea will remain unparted? And so they're like, well, if closure holds and all that stuff, then no, they don't know that, right? So God would be like, he seems closer to an objection to like the uniformity of nature, not a reason to believe in it. In fact, he has the power to destroy mountains. He's performed all sorts of miracles throughout history, miracles that shouldn't be possible, depending on what kind of religion you follow. He's done all sorts of things like
I
Islam is
don't think that's a
looking
good
in.
objection.
Yeah,
But
I mean, that's a great
I don't think
objection.
that's a
It
good
sounds like
objection. But I don't see
Descartes'
how it's
demon.
relevant to the.
It sounds like Descartes' demon for like the uniformity of nature. So I don't think that God is a good reason to believe in the uniformity of nature.
Yeah, so I don't think that's a good objection to the uniformity of nature if God exists. But I don't see how that's relevant to the topic that was being discussed.
Well, so you were saying that like, if God created the world in such a way that predictive power, like the power of something predicting something in the future, would be reason giving to think that it's true, and God
Right.
made it in a specific uniform sort of way. And I was like, this sounds very similar to the uniformity argument, which, like I said, that's a counter to the uniformity. If you have a response to it, I'm open to a response, but I think that it's a good reason to
Well,
say God is
I just
closer to
don't
a
think it's
skeptical
I
challenge
just don't
for
think it's
uniformity
relevant.
than he
Uh,
is for like a reason to believe in it. So
I
like he's
mean,
closer to a skeptical challenge.
okay, but now you're shifting to a different argument, which I don't see the relevance between the two. Okay, like okay, the uniformity argument. Okay,
Well, I just
what
explained the relevance. What part of it are you confused about?
the part I'm confused about is it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant whether nature is uniform to the idea that a predictive success leads to
That's going to be
truth.
componential to that, right? Like it's going to have to be the case that nature is uniform for predictive capacity to lead to truth. That's going to be
Why?
componential. Well,
Why?
so
Why can predictive success lead to
if
truth
tomorrow the
just in
laws
case
of physics
God
change,
intervenes?
if tomorrow the laws of physics change, or God changes something, arbitrarily on his own whim, I can't use, like, for instance, if I'm trying to monitor the stars to learn something about the world or something like that. The moment God changes something, I might be wrong about all the presumptions that I said before, right? Because if I'm gonna have that predictive capacity, it's gonna have to hold for some future case because that's what it means to predict. So
But
without the
that just
uniformity of
means you're
nature,
assuming that the uniformity of nature is one of the requirements, one of the essential requirements for predictive success. But that's not the way that I talked about predictive success in the past. What I
okay,
said
well,
is that God
what is
could have designed the universe in such a way such that it leads to predictive success. So, for instance, let's say
or
whenever you predict something, God intervenes to, I don't know. I don't think this is a very plausible view, but let's say whenever you predict something, God intervenes to make that true.
okay, well, I can give you examples where he didn't. Would that be a reason given you think that he doesn't?
You mean like appeal to the Bible?
Well, no, I would talk about like predictive capability within the scientific realm, where things were successfully predicted, but the theory turned out to be false.
Yeah, but you understand that exceptions don't invalidate a general rule, right?
Well, I mean, if the rule is that like God is intervening and making this true, and he didn't, then we have good reason to think he's not doing that, right?
No, that's not the general rule. That was just raised as a hypothetical. I think the general rule is that God designed certain laws to act in certain ways that they lead to certain predictions, and if they don't, God can always intervene to make a prediction true in a way that leads to truth, humans acquiring truth.
So one,
So
I don't think that like one, I don't think that that makes a whole lot of sense. But more
why
importantly,
not?
I'm
I mean,
curious, like the
why
view
not?
from
I mean,
the
do you think like which part do you think doesn't make sense? Like, is it the first part, like
saying,
God could have
saying God
designed
like
the laws of the universe?
God designing the universe so that predictive capacity, like the things would be predictable like that. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, my reasoning is because God sounds like God sounds closer to a skeptical challenge to something like that than he does to like a reason to think that that's the case, right? So, like for instance, as an example, God might make it so that when I can't remember the story in the Bible where he made it rain on a fleece of I'm trying to remember the backstory. Maybe there was a weather predictor, right? Imagine there's a weather predictor, and he says, "Okay, well, you know, I'm gonna predict the weather tomorrow. It doesn't look like it's gonna rain." And then this person prays, and God says, "Well, I've got to make it rain, right?" So boom, he makes it rain. Now, if it was always going to rain, then it's not a miracle, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
never a miracle to begin with.
I mean,
But if it's the case that
that's a.
it wasn't going to rain, then God changed it so that it would, and that would reduce our predictive capability. So it's kind of this dilemma between either there's never been a miracle performed in the past, like God's never intervened and changed the world, and it's always been the case that it's going to be predictable forever, or it's the case that God is a skeptical challenge to this. Right, so if it's
I
the
mean
case that God
that's
never
just
intervened, then it reduces it to being useless, right?
I mean, that's just kind of a. I find that not a very good objection because, like,
Well,
the
maybe just
standard
deal with the
view.
dilemma. Which of the horns
Well,
do you?
wait, let me finish. Like, I don't interrupt you, so I'd like to have a chance to speak.
Go ahead, man.
So I, so it's not a very good objection because, like, the standard view among theists is that God only intervenes extremely rarely in human events in terms of like performing miracles. So, if anything, the general case would still hold that if God designed the universe and to act in a certain way, the universe will still be predictable. Um, on the other hand, your view would be that underlying reality is just non-intentional, right? And if reality is non-intentional, um, presumably, well, there are good arguments to suppose that predictive success would never lead to, or is highly unlikely to lead to truth. So, comparing the two theories, under one theory, theism, predictive success could lead to truth. Under the other theory, predictive success is highly unlikely to lead to truth.
Yeah, so I think that you didn't even deal. One, you didn't even engage with the dilemma I raised, right? So like either you're committed to like, and even if you say it's in the rare case, right? In the rare case, you're still having this sort of like Cartesian demon moment, right? You don't
That's
have
not
a
a Cartesian demon.
Yeah, sure it is. I mean, it matches the exact same thing. So the Cartesian demon.
No, it doesn't, because the Cartesian demon is supposed to like
He
just
tricks our
make
knowledge.
you
Right?
hallucinate about
If I
all
could,
your views.
if I could get the whole argument out. So it's going to be like a Cartesian demon in the sense that, like, for instance, I don't know that tomorrow the world will continue, right? I don't know that, there's all sorts of things that I'm not going to know. And it's not just going to be based on some sort of evidential reason, right? It's going to be something about like God's capacity to snap us out of existence should he decide to. And this is something that, like I said, it just sounds closer to like a skeptical challenge to the thing you're positing it that he's reason to believe in. And he just sounds closer to a skeptical challenge. And I don't know how you square that circle. And you didn't even deal with the dilemma. Could you maybe deal with the dilemma and try to give me what your answer is, and then we can work from there?
I feel like I already dealt with that dilemma. You have a set of beliefs, one of which is internally consistent, the other is not. The internal consistency is if you believe in a God who generally designed the laws of the universe in such a way that they're generally uniform, then it's implausible to think that the universe would just end tomorrow. Therefore, predicting success could lead to truth. And in fact, it's plausible to lead to truth in case such a God wanted us to discover what reality is like. So that's an internally. Wait, I'm not done. So that's an internally consistent set of beliefs, which doesn't undermine itself. There's no undercutting the theater.
Well, there is. I just pointed it out, right? Like I literally just showed it to you 5 minutes ago. So the defeater is that if there is a God who designed the universe such that it has this predictive capability, but he has the ability to intervene, then we don't have that predictive capability. It just follows from the premises, right?
No, because
so,
again,
the idea though is that you didn't even deal with the dilemma. What you did was you shift the burden. So you said something like, okay, well, either my worldview or your worldview. One, that's a false dichotomy. Two, if there is this view that like there's this God, there's this deity that is intervening in the world, whether it's rare or common. I mean, for instance, some people think it's all the time that God's intervening. He's always speaking to us and always doing things. He's an active living God from their perspective. Maybe you don't hold that view. Maybe he's not an active living God, and maybe he's just the biblical God.
He's not performing miracles.
And he's not done those things. But the thing is, he has the capacity to do so, right? So it reminds me of closer to an objection to like this sort of continuity, like in the atheistic view, right? If there's not a God and the world does not have this overarching arbitrator, then we don't really have a good reason to think there's ever going to be a point where things will massively change. Maybe at the end of time when the laws of physics break down, or maybe at the beginning of time when we see that the laws of physics break down. But other than that, there's going to be some sort of an energy input that's going to be necessary for changes. There's going to be some kind of a standard that we can think of, like in a non-theistic sense, where there's like these laws, and these laws they don't seem to change. We don't have good reason to think they're going to change. But if we do have good reason to think they're going to change, like for instance, at the center of a black hole, they change. Sorry, not the center, but the beyond the event horizon of a black hole, they change. So in those cases, sure, we think they change. But in your view, you have good reason to think that maybe you could maybe say something like, well, maybe tomorrow God will perform a miracle and there'll be some kind of a end of world scenario. Like presumably you think that God is going to do that at some point. And it's going to come as a surprise to us all. So how do you account for like any future events? How do you think that it's going to go for the next 100 years or any of that when you're kind of banking on this like thief in the night sort of scenario from God, right? Like, how do you do that? How does that give you a strong confidence in the concept?
I would prefer if you spoke in a little bit more succinct way, because you made multiple claims and it's very hard for me to respond. So the first point you made is that I haven't dealt with the objection, and I have. Yeah. You're confusing possibility with plausibility. So yes, it's possible that God intervenes in the world, but that doesn't entail it's plausible. In fact, the standard Christian worldview is it's not plausible. So basically, the objection aims to be an undercutting defeater for the unity of nature.
Clarifying question: are you saying something like a clarifying question there? Are you saying something like you think that God's not going to ever intervene again?
No, I never said that. I think it's implausible. What I said is it's implausible that God would intervene in such a way that it would substantially lower the predictive success of our scientific theories.
Why?
And that is entailed by the fact that the standard view in Christian theism is that God only very rarely intervenes in the affairs of the world, in the events in the world, which just entails that God's actions in the world don't don't substantially lower the predictive success of scientific theories. So that's all I'm gonna say about that one. And I want to respond to your second point. The second point was that we have no reason to suppose that nature is not uniform, right? Or predictive success is doesn't lead to truth under a physicalist model. Well, we have multiple reasons. So if only a physical universe exists, then basically you have to explain how life, like how humans developed, right? And the only horse in town, or the most plausible model, would be evolutionary theory. Evolutionary, like one of the entailments of like, and Alvin Plunk has pointed this out, is that one of the one of the things which follows from evolutionary theory is that you could form it's plausible, it's not only possible, it's plausible that you would form more false models of reality compared to true models. And even predictive success wouldn't help you, because you could form totally false models. So for instance, you could form models like let's say there's a tribe in the Amazon who forms a model that a tree is not made of physical stuff, instead it's made of soul stuff, or like, I don't know, like witch stuff. Their model has as much predictive success as yours, because um, the witches are always there, and like they're like very small witches, right? They're like there's the size of like maybe like the particle, like elementary particles or something like that. And normally, like they wouldn't they don't behave intentionally, but they're still like imbued with like, I don't know, like witch stuff or whatever. So so that theory has as much predictive success as yours, but it's a completely false theory under like standard views of reference, right? So then so then if you're a physicalist, there's multiple reasons to believe that um, you can have predictive success can lead to truth. Not only it's possible, it's
So
plausible.
let me just kind of like go over, because I think there might be some kind of a disconnect. Are you a direct realist?
Um, I'm not familiar with that term. Can you
So
explain?
like there's a one-to-one relationship between our experience and what is actually the case in reality. Like we are actually directly experiencing
Correspondence?
reality.
No, I don't think there's a one-to-one correspondence.
Okay, so why would you hold to something like where there's like a deity that's going to be um, in this instance? It sounds like you're taking a direct realist stance, because the direct realist is going to be like really committed to something like scientific.
No, I'm a representationalist. I don't know if that's compatible. I don't know if that's subsumed under
Well,
direct
that's
realism.
so representationalism is a type of indirect realism. So no, um, but the idea is that if you're a representationalist, like, which is something close to whatever I am, right? Like we're probably on the same wavelength on that topic. So it seems strange for you to think that if there's this physicalist reality, and there is this disconnect, like you're committed to that there is a disconnect between us and reality, it seems strange to then demand that the atheist or the physicalist make an account of this that would be counter to what your position would be. So it seems strange that you're not like a direct realist, for given the position you're talking about here. Like why
I
why are
think the problems that you're bringing up is only a problem for a physicalist worldview, because
what are
representation is going to be, because if you adopt idealism or something like that, then obviously whatever problems you posited, whatever problems you came up with are just gonna melt away. So 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 basically this is another reason to reject physicalism, because, and I can give you another like deductive argument here, which just entails that under physicalism you can't even represent like any external properties, you can't even think about, you can't even fathom, you can't even yeah, you can't represent any physical external properties with your thoughts. So so like this is going to be like a second reason to reject the idea that um that scientific theories lead to some type of like stance independent truth, because what the argument shows is that reality, external reality, is mind dependent. Do you want me to give you the argument?
I'm more interested in talking about, to be honest, I'm more interested in like kind of understanding, because it sounds like you're rejecting physicalism, and I've said I'm not like a strong physicalist. I don't know what my commitments are on that one. But what are you? Are you a dualist? Are you like a strong idealist, or what is it?
I'm undecided between dualism and idealism, but the problem is that this is another a cost for your worldview, because you don't have a view on ontology. You don't have, you're not decided on physicalism, you're not decided on dualism, you're not decided on idealism.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
at
see that
least
as a
leaning
cost.
towards idealism. Like, you don't have a view of ontology. You can't even say what exists in the universe.
I mean, that doesn't follow. Like we're talking about like something like epistemology, right? So if I say epistemology exists, yeah, sure, that might be constitutive of an ontology. I just don't know what the substance of it is. I don't know what my commitments are, whether it's physicalist, whether it's dualist. I reject dualism. I lean monism with respect to these things. I think that monism is more likely true, and I think dualism is. We have good reason to think dualism is false.
Okay, but monism could be idealism, or it could be physicalism.
Exactly. Which I think is one of those two things is going to be true.
Okay, well, I can give you an argument that should automatically make you an idealist.
I fail, but okay, go ahead.
All right, so premise one would be that the mental content of, premise one is that mental content of a thought, of a visual experience, is just identical to the conscious aspects of that experience. So, for instance, what I mean by that is the mental content of, let's say, seeing a red circle is just identical to what you consciously experience, which would, in this case, would just be a red circle. It's not a controversial premise, so I don't think you would have reasons to reject it.
We'll just lay out the argument. I'll tell you if I have any problems.
Okay, so premise two would be, for any visual experience, there's an indistinguishable hallucination with the same mental content.
I feel like this argument sounds familiar, but keep going.
Okay, premise three is that hallucinations don't refer to mind independent, don't represent mind independent or stance independent reality.
Okay.
Conclusion is that visual experiences don't represent mind independent reality.
Well, so you equivocated on stance independent and mind independent. That's the first error.
Okay. So actually, for drop stance independence,
the second error.
Yeah, I'm not talking about stance independence. I misspoke. So it's actually about mind independence.
Okay. And then, so the second issue is that you're going to, if you have no way of distinguishing between, like, for instance, a hallucination and the thing that is like actually the case in reality, then, like, for instance, I've seen demons, and it was a drug induced demonic moment, right? Those demons weren't real. They weren't real. I know they weren't real. It's kind of funny that that it even happened, because I got a diagnosis as to why it happened, and once the diagnosis, once they gave me the medications that would counteract that, I'm fine. I don't see them anymore. I saw things from, like, I saw Santa Claus trying to offer me a plate of cookies. I had conversations with people that didn't exist. It was crazy. But those things don't actually exist. Now, if you hold to that premise, if you hold to that premise that there's no difference between those two, then you have to hold that Santa Claus actually exists. Now, I'm not a Santa Claus.
No, I don't have to hold that. I mean,
Yeah.
that wasn't any of the premises. The premises are
Well,
premise two would
said
be
there was
that
no
for
difference, right?
any for the premise two was that for any visual experience, there's an indistinguishable hallucination with the same mental content, right? You don't deny that premise, because, like, for any visual experience, I can just think of a scenario in which a neuroscientist just stimulates your brain with certain electrical impulses that produce the exact same experience. So the premise is true.
Well, but can you say the whole? Actually, just write out the whole argument and post it somewhere so we can actually see the wording of it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to I'm gonna have to continue the discussion some other time, because I already I've been here an hour, and it's like it's past midnight. It's almost 1 o'clock here.
Okay, all right, no problem. Yeah, just post that
I
post that
just
argument from there
I'll
because
just
I'd like
very
to.
quickly go through how about I just go through the argument very quickly, because like writing it out would waste me like 15 minutes, and I just want to go to bed like fairly quickly. So premise one is that the mental content of a visual experience is identical to what you consciously experience. That's just true definitionally, right?
Yeah, the
Premise two
mental.
is that for any visual experience, there's an indistinguishable hallucination with the same mental content, which is true because we can think of like a neuroscientist just stimulating your brain, which would be indistinguishable from just a veridical experience, right? Premise three is that hallucinations don't represent mind independent reality. Conclusion is that since the mental content, well, I'm just going to tell you how I derived the conclusion.
Wait a second. You think that they don't represent mind independent reality? I thought you were a representationalist. You said that just a minute ago.
Hallucinations don't represent mind independent reality.
But you're a representationalist.
Yeah, well, do I think when you talk with Santa Claus, do I think there's like actual Santa Claus in the external world? No. So I don't think hallucinations represent mind independent reality.
But you're a representationalist. Do you not see how that's contrary to each other? Like if you think that like how's
that contrary?
So like if you're a representationalist, you think that like what we're doing is our experience is creating a representation of whatever is existing transcendentally apart from us, right?
No,
that's the idea.
No.
Okay,
No.
what's your
What I think happens in hallucinations is that your experiences just represent a concept. A concept exists as like just conceptually, but it doesn't, like Santa Claus exists conceptually, but it doesn't exist like he doesn't exist in reality, right?
So I don't know if you understood my objection.
Well,
like,
wait. So you think like mental content of hallucination represent things in reality?
Well, the idea is that like we have like these representations of material objects outside the mind. That's what representationalism is. Which that's what you said your position is. But if you don't think that these hallucinations are representing a mind independent reality or something that's like transcendently apart from you, then you're not a representationalist, and that's a direct contradiction, right? So like
no, it's not, because it could be the case that these mental states are representing mind dependent reality. I could still be a representationalist, and that would not be a contradiction.
That's definitely a contradiction, dude. Like,
how's that a contradiction? Representationalism is vague on whether things in the mind represent mind dependent or mind independent reality. It's ambivalent. It doesn't really specify. So then how's that a contradiction?
What was the conclusion? Because free speech didn't write it down. So the contradiction is that what you're saying here is that like what you're saying is that there's not this mind independent reality, but you're a representationalist, and that's like componential of a representationalist.
Okay, but then which premise are you denying? Because the conclusion follows deductively from the premises. So I don't think your objection is relevant, because I already said why not, because
well, it's an internal critique,
is neutral on whether we're representing external physical events or external mind dependent events. Well, it could be the case that hallucinations represent external mind dependent events. I leave that option open. What I'm ruling out is that they represent external mind independent reality. I don't think it's the case that Santa Claus exists outside your mind when you hallucinated when you took I don't know what.
Yeah, no, that was the whole point of the of what I was saying, is that he didn't exist. He wasn't really there. But so what was the conclusion to the argument?
Oh, okay. I'm just going to tell you how you derive the conclusion. So I derived the conclusion using the identity of indiscernibles.
No, so what is the conclusion?
Conclusion is that your visual experiences don't represent mind independent reality. Okay. And the way I derived it is that
you're not a representationalist. Do you not see how that's contradictory?
Did I not just tell you that representationalism is neutral about whether mental states represent mind dependent or mind independent events?
I mean, you said that, but you're just wrong about like they're talking about like material objects outside the mind. That's part of the like I can read you from Britannica, like this is the This is the Britannica definition, which is like a philosophical place. So philosophy is a philosophical theory of knowledge based on the assertion that the mind perceives only mental images, representations of material objects outside the mind, not the objects themselves. So you're representing something that is independent of your mind. That's the position. But if you hold to a strong theory like what you just said, that's not going to be that's going to be the contradiction, which is that you are that you are representing and you are not representing mind independent reality. That's the contradiction.
But idealism is just the view that like what exists fundamentally is mind. I just reject that definition because what exists fundamentally is mind, and there's no emergent properties, there's no emergent physical properties, right? It's just a monistic view that what exists are mental states.
I mean, I know you got to get to bed. I don't want to hold you for too long because you said you got to get to bed, which I understand. I'm just pointing out that your view is your two views are contradictory. You can't be a representationist and hold to them.
Okay, I just don't think that's a substantive objection because, like I said,
I think that a contradiction is a substantive objection. What? Like an exact contradiction isn't this like the most substantive objection?
Well, you didn't give me a contradiction. I would prefer if you let me speak. So idealism is completely compatible with the idea that what exists outside your mind is just like mental phenomenon. And it could be the case that your mental states just represent things which exist outside your mind, which are nonetheless mental phenomenon, which are mind dependent, right? So my argument actually doesn't conflict with idealism or representationalism for that matter. Anyway, I gotta go to bed. Thank you for the discussion. And
I mean,